The snow fell in muted sheets, soft as feathers, heavy as silence, blanketing the ridges and valleys in a hush that pressed against the earth. Each flake clung to Eliza Marrow's lashes, stinging cold against skin already raw from the wind. Her boots, worn thin at the soles, had long since surrendered to the frost. She walked without knowing if her legs carried her, or if the storm itself dragged her forward, each breath a ragged thread unraveling into the night. Shame and fear clung to her more tightly than the frost, as though they, too, sought to bury her alive. She whispered to herself, hoarse and trembling, "They're going to kill us!" And the sound of her own voice dissolved into the storm. The world blurred at the edges. She could no longer distinguish where the sky ended and the frozen earth began. Her thoughts wandered to the town she had left behind. The sneers, the murmurs behind gloved hands, the sharp-lipped cruelty of Maggie Thorne repeating her disgrace until it no longer belonged to her, but to everyone who whispered it. Eliza had been pushed out not with force, but with silence that pressed colder than this blizzard. Men refusing to meet her eyes, women turning shoulders when she passed, the sheriff's half-hearted warning that she should not linger near the streets after dark. She had left with little more than a blanket, a scrap of bread, and the crushing knowledge that there was no place she could claim as her own. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the drift, snow rising up around her as though to cradle and claim her. She thought of her mother's hymn once hummed in kitchens long gone, the melody dim in memory, a song about sparrows watched over even in storms. No sparrow came for her. Only silence. Only wind. Her body curled into itself, desperate for warmth that would not come. She closed her eyes, waiting for the storm to end her in the gentlest way it knew, by swallowing her whole. But then the snow shifted, the crunch of heavy steps cutting through the muffled stillness. A shadow loomed. At first she thought the storm itself had risen into form. Broad shoulders carved against the white, bare skin steaming with the heat of life despite the snow clinging to him. Her gaze caught on the breadth of his chest, the old scars running across muscle like maps of battles won and lost. A buffalo hide cloak hung loose about his shoulders, but he wore no shirt, his body as unyielding as stone, as alive as fire. The storm seemed to bow around him, reluctant to touch. She wanted to shrink back, to vanish into the drift, but her limbs refused. He crouched beside her. His eyes, black as obsidian, searched her face with a calm neither cruel nor gentle, only watchful, as though he weighed whether she belonged to life or to death. Eliza tried to speak, her lips cracked and trembling. No words formed, only a whimper, a plea. The man did not answer with speech. He slipped his arms beneath her with effortless strength, lifting her as though she weighed no more than a fallen branch. Heat radiated from him, burning against her frozen skin, startling her back into pain. She wanted to scream, but the sound lodged in her throat. The world swayed as he carried her. Snow fell thicker, clinging to his hair and shoulders, but he did not falter. Each step cut a path she could not see, the landscape bending to his will. She forced her eyes open, and in the dim she caught his face. Austere, weathered, scar at the jawline, yet not unkind. He looked forward always, never down at her, as though his purpose had already been chosen long before she fell into his path. Her heart beat with fear and something stranger, a reluctant thread of trust. The lodge appeared at last, tucked beneath a ridge of stone and pine. Smoke curled faintly from its roof, fragile against the storm. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, stepped inside, and laid her upon a bed of furs near the hearth. Firelight spilled across the room, chasing shadows, washing the wooden walls in amber glow. The scent of pine smoke and dried sage filled her lungs. He moved wordlessly, stoking the fire, laying wood with practiced ease until warmth filled the space. Then he turned to her, his gaze once again steady, unreadable. Eliza clutched the blanket he draped across her, her hands trembling. "Why?" she tried, her voice raw. Her shame rose anew, tangled with fear. She was alone with a man whose people the town spoke of with equal parts dread and scorn. She had heard the names spat in taverns, the half-truths shaped into curses. Now one stood before her, shirtless in the storm, and she could not bring herself to believe the gossip or to ignore it. She whispered again, softer this time. "They're going to kill us." The words were for herself as much as him, a confession of dread. He did not respond with the language she knew. Instead, he stepped close enough that she felt the heat of him soak through her blanket, and in a voice low as the rumble of distant thunder, he whispered words in his tongue. She could not understand them, yet the cadence carried weight, a gravity that pressed against her chest. Her blood chilled, not from the cold but from the certainty in his tone, as though he spoke not of possibility but of fate. She shivered, clutching the blanket tighter, heart pounding with a new rhythm. Fear, yes, but also a stirring of something she could not yet name. His eyes lingered on hers a moment longer before he turned back to the fire, feeding it another log. Sparks leapt into the air, then settled into quiet flame. She watched his back, broad and unguarded, and wondered what kind of man faced the storm without a shirt, who carried a stranger into shelter without a word, who whispered truths that froze her blood though she could not translate them. The fire crackled, the storm howled beyond the walls, and Eliza Marrow understood that whatever hunted her in the world outside, something greater had found her here. And still his whisper lingered, echoing in her mind, each syllable heavy with promise, with warning, with a destiny that had already begun to close its hand around her. The town of Dry Creek wore winter like a scowl. Snow pressed heavy against the rooftops, turning chimneys into stooped shoulders, while the wind dragged dust and ice down the main street. Inside the mercantile, where the stove glowed with a grudging flame, gossip clung thicker than the smoke. Margaret Thorne leaned across the counter, her sharp nose catching the light, her voice slicing through the air like a knife against rawhide. "She's gone and good riddance," she said. Eliza Marrow always carried trouble in her skirts. "You mark my words, wherever she is now, she's dragging shame along with her." Other women nodded, shawls drawn tight, eyes bright with the satisfaction of judgment. Their whispers wove together, steady as the storm outside. A widow who'd turned her back on her kin, a girl too pretty for her own good, a mouth too quiet to defend itself. All of it became proof. In their telling, Eliza wasn't merely absent, she was condemned. The town did not lose people, it cast them out. Sheriff Harlan Crow stood near the door, his broad hands folded over his belt buckle, face carved from lines of wear. He said little as he listened, though his eyes drifted toward the frost-blurred window. He had known Eliza's father once, a decent man buried on a hill before his daughter had reached womanhood. The memory tugged at him, but the weight of his badge pressed heavier. To defend her now would brand him soft, and softness in a sheriff meant lawless nights. Still, when Maggie Thorne's voice sharpened into poison, she ran to the wilds, to them savages. "Don't you doubt it!" His jaw set, and his gaze cut across the room with a warning he didn't voice. The words spread faster than snow on the wind. By evening, the saloon buzzed with speculation. Samuel Pike leaned at the bar, his wiry frame coiled with restless energy, a grin that carried no humor. "If she's with one of them," he said, loud enough for every ear, "then she's as good as lost. But maybe there's coin in bringing her back. Or a reward in proving what she's become." Ezekiel Brand, thick-shouldered and mean-eyed, clapped him on the back, his laughter rolling like stones in a tin. The men drank to it, not out of belief but hunger, for profit, for cruelty, for something to set fire to the long winter. Meanwhile, beyond the edge of town, in the hidden lodge beneath the ridge, Eliza stirred against the warmth of the firs. She watched Dakota move with a rhythm born of silence. He tended the fire, stripped bark from wood, crushed herbs in a stone bowl. His presence filled the space without demanding it. She kept her blanket pulled to her chin, though her body no longer trembled with cold, but with unease she could not name. The town's voice still echoed in her mind, every insult, every glance of scorn, and now it tangled with the image of this man who had carried her from death's edge without a word. When he set a bowl of broth before her, steam rising fragrant with sage and bone, she whispered thanks though she wasn't sure if he understood. His eyes flickered, a shadow of acknowledgement, before he turned back to the hearth. It unsettled her, this quietness. Men in town had always filled space with noise, boasts, judgments, demands. His silence was heavier, and somehow more dangerous. Yet when her fingers brushed the wooden rim of the bowl, warmth spreading into her palms, she felt steadier than she had in months. In town, Sheriff Crow walked the snowy street alone, boots crunching. The weight of decision pressed at his shoulders. He'd heard Pike's scheming, Brand's laughter, the whispers swelling into certainty. By morning, there would be men riding out, claiming justice though it was greed that spurred them. He thought of Eliza's pale face, the hollow look she carried, and something twisted inside him. He could warn her, if he knew where she had gone. But snow covered tracks, and pride covered truth. He adjusted his hat brim against the cold and walked on, his silence no less damning than the gossip. Back at the lodge, Eliza gathered courage to stand. Her legs wavered, but she pushed herself upright, clutching the blanket like armor. Dakota turned, his gaze dropping briefly to her unsteady frame before returning to the fire. She wanted him to speak, to offer something, assurance, explanation, even reproach, but he remained as stone. Frustration burned through her fear. "Do you know what they'll say?" she asked, her voice thin but edged. "They'll say I ran to you, that I belong to you now, and they'll hate me more than ever." Dakota's dark eyes lifted to hers. For the first time, his voice came in English, rough and spare as gravel underfoot. "What they say is wind. Wind dies. You breathe still." Her breath caught. The words were plain, yet they struck like a hand closing around her chest. To be told that she still breathed, that her life still carried weight, was a gift she hadn't known she yearned for. She sat again, trembling not from cold, but from the shattering of something inside her. Beyond the lodge walls, the storm eased. Stars pierced the black sky, sharp as flint. Samuel Pike and Ezekiel Brand rode under that sky, their horses' hooves muffled in the snow. They spoke in low tones, planning where they'd search come dawn, their breath smoking in the cold. Pike's grin widened with each step closer to violence. "She won't last long out here," he said. "But if she has, she's his now. And that means she dies with him." Ezekiel spat into the snow, his eyes narrowing toward the ridge where pines loomed dark. "Then we'll make sure of it. Folks'll thank us for it too." Back in the lodge, Eliza lay awake, staring at the low rafters, the fire's glow painting them in restless shadows. Her body was warm, but her mind churned with dread. Dakota's whisper from before, the words she had not understood, echoed against her heart. Tonight, they seemed less like a warning and more like a promise, though she could not tell if the promise was of survival or ruin. And in the distance, faint but certain, she thought she heard the echo of hooves muffled by snow, carrying with them the judgment of a town that had already decided her fate. The days that followed blurred into pale hours marked by the hiss of wind against the lodge and the crackle of fire within. Eliza found herself caught in a rhythm not of her own making, a cadence drawn by Dakota's quiet movements and the slow thawing of her own body. Shame clung to her at first, a second skin she could not shed. Each time she reached for the bowl he set before her, or took a corner of cloth he left by the hearth, she remembered the women in town whispering of her ruin. Their voices haunted her even here, echoing louder than the storm. Yet necessity demanded she act, and in the smallest gestures she began to step beyond her fear. One